very last section of my book is called Concluding Words, Old is Gold. So in this very last section, I try to make an emphasis, as I did in chapter 1 of my book. I try to make some full circle in this last section by emphasizing the importance and role of our Goswamis in resorting to revelation, especially of Srila Jiva Goswami as our Tattvacharya, and especially in connection to his Satsandarbhas, in order to ascertain what is to be considered as Gaudiya Siddhanta or not. I've shared some interesting quotes coming from Chaitanya Charitamrita and Srila Prabhupada and others regarding the central throne that Jiva Goswami and his Sandarbhas is occupying for us Gaudiyas, and how he acts, or his Sandarbhas act as the ultimate arbiter, if you will, in settling doctrinal disputes in our Sampradaya. And that's why the name of this concluding section, Old is Gold. Now we are to resort to our original Gaudiya Acharyas to establish what is Siddhanta in this topic and in any other topic. And then I continue this concluding section by sharing a summary of the whole book, summary in bullet points, where I won't repeat them in detail, of course. You can see the rest of the clips and you can read the book for yourself. But basically my point there is like we are one in Siddhanta, we are to be one, because Sampradaya means a school of thought, and Sampradaya means something which fully delivers Siddhanta. So if we belong to one Sampradaya, means we are one in Siddhanta. And on the basis of that unity, we can allow diversity of expression in Avideya and Prayojan. Unity in Siddhanta and Tattva, unity in Sambandha, and diversity in Bhava, diversity in Prayojan, in Prema, and so on. So that's a very crucial word. And that basis of Siddhanta, again, for us is Srimad Bhagavatam and the books of our Goswamis. And which is the conclusion that we receive from them, briefly mentioning what I mentioned throughout my book, that Bhakti comes from Bhakti, or in other words, Bhakti comes from the Bhakta, Bhakti comes from Sadhu Sangha, and that Sukriti, as I mentioned in the second chapter, the third chapter, Sukriti is another way of speaking about Sadhu Sangha and Bhakti. It's not that Bhakti comes from Sadhu Sangha comes from Sukriti, as if they were totally different things. In all the stages we were speaking about Bhakti, Bhaktya Sanjataya Bhaktya, Bhakti is not coming from Sukriti as ordinary material piety, if you will. Bhakti is the essence of the Swarup Shakti, and as we mentioned, Swarup Shakti, Sandini, Sambit, Ladini are inherent in Bhagavan, but not inherent in the Tatastha Shiva, and therefore Bhakti is not inherent in the Jiva. And not only Bhakti is not inherent, but Bhava, Prem, Rasa, Siddha Deha, all of them being as well composed of Swarup Shakti, are also not inherent in the Tatastha Shiva, although the Tatastha Jiva has the potential to embrace Swarup Shakti, or to be embraced by Swarup Shakti and attain its ultimate Hegel subjective fulfillment in the context of Bhakti-ananda. At the same time, I also mentioned how Bhakti it's not possible for Bhakti to not be inherent and be inherent at the same time, this notion of teleological inherence, because if we consider this idea, okay, there's no, Bhakti is inherent in the sense of a predetermined potential that we are already made to attain a particular form of Bhakti as the ultimate goal, that will contradict Mahaprabhu's gift to the world, which comes without discrimination, is given to anyone and everyone in every place or same circumstance. But if we embrace the notion of teleological inherence, we will be saying only some specific people are exclusively destined to receive that gift, and actually they already have it, and Mahaprabhu is coming just to activate that. So it will really downplay Mahaprabhu's, the whole Gaur Leela's dispensation. Or we also mentioned this notion of you attain Brahma Sayuja or Santa Rasa, eternal goals which you don't require Prem. You are experiencing subjective highest fulfillment for you, subjectively speaking, and there's no Prem there. So how we are to explain this other situation. And God will be mere partial, because in that case He may allow some jivas to attain the highest fulfillment in a predetermined way, some others not, and so on. And then I continued analyzing other sections of Shastra, like the Brahma Sutra, Vedanta Sutra, Baladev's commentaries on that, Baladev Vidyabhushan. What else? We also mentioned that love is not sleeping, love cannot sleep, God makes Bhagavan be awake 24/7. And I analyzed different sections of Shastra, different arguments, classical arguments against the notion of Bhakti not being inherent. I spent considerable section for that. Also, the fact I address the fact that Jiva, someone like Jiva Goswami is quoting Jamatri Muni and Acharya from the Sri Sampradaya at one point doesn't mean that he has to quote or he has to think to agree with the sources he's quoting. That's not necessarily the case, but he may quote for utilitarian purposes. Some other acharyas use some lists, some concepts in order to convey Gaudiya Siddhanta. And then the second part of the book has to do with the notion of contemporary acharyas like Bhaktivinoda Thakur and his successor, popularizing, if you will, the apparent notion of inherence and which are the reason for that. So I presented three main hypotheses: circumstantial adjustment, theological unfolding, and translational issues, and how all of them may combine and give us some notion of why at times some of our contemporary acharyas seem to have contradicted not only with Shastra but with what they themselves said in other moments. So I'm trying to deal with that in the best possible way, and how these relative elements, so-called outreach techniques or whatever name you may like to give, they're also present in Shastra in many places. Many of them may come as a result of samadhi. That's something that I deal with. And basically at the end of my book, I leave it to the reader, trying to set a new tone for this type of conversations and discussions. I leave it to the reader to decide which of my opinions or hypotheses or some other one, I remain open for that, may be more fitting concerning why at times some of our acharyas may have seemed to contradict themselves or say something different from Shastra. And what to say, but apart from that, the conclusion of Shastra, the Siddhanta, whether regarding Bhakti not being inherent in the Jiva, that's not a topic where we are open to think whatever we like, because it's really clearly established in a consensual way throughout Srimad Bhagavatam and Goswami Grantha. And then at the end of this section, just in case, also after these conclusive words, I share an appendix in my book with almost 20 pages of more quotes. I didn't want just to put all of them inside the book, so for those who will like, you have 20 more pages of quotes, or more, at least 20 more pages in Word format, but eventually when the book will be printed for sure, maybe more than that. And with quotes that show how Bhakti is not inherent, Rasa is not inherent, Prem is not inherent. Also, I will share 10 pages of Word format here now of bibliography, what I try to resort to. And I basically conclude my book by invoking and speaking some words about the grace of Sriman Mahaprabhu, the grace of Thakurani, Srimati Radharani, and the Srimad Bhagavatam. And I just choose Madhurena Samapayat. No, we'll have to end every project with something sweet at the end. So I quote some well-known poem by Bhartrihari when he speaks about this drop of rain falling on three different spaces, like on hot iron, on a lotus leaf, and on an oyster. So if the drop of rain falls in hot iron, it basically disappears immediately. If it falls on a lotus leaf, it remains for a moment in a beautiful way. You can take a picture, but eventually also disappears. But if it falls on an oyster, in one particular nakshatra, that becomes a pearl, it is said. So basically, the notion, the symbol of this poetry is that we as Tatastha Jivas our potential depends on the environment we are associating with. So we associate with mundane Maya Shakti environment, we may be like the drop falling on the iron, hot iron, or maybe at much some sattvic thing, the drop falling on the lotus leaf, a nice picture you can take. But our highest reach, our ultimate potential will be in connection with Bhakti, with Swarup Shakti. So even though Swarup Shakti is not inherent in the Jiva, we as the Tatastha Jiva has a brilliant, glorious potential to inherit this Bhakti, this Swarup Shakti, and thus become all that we can be.